Thank you for taking the time to talk about how this year has sort of worked out on some of our rivers. We will have some presentations and hopefully a pretty good amount of time for discussion or sharing or commiserating or however you view the end of the year assessment of the year to have been. So I guess we could start with the slide sharing so we can kind of keep ourselves on track and remind ourselves of who we are. So we're at the this is the River Management Society, the river safety planning for use that is inspired by this crazy year that we've just now finished. And we're hosted by the State River Programs Working Group. And you might say, but how come everybody who's speaking works for the federal government? Um, we've just started this group to hopefully remind all those who know RMS that our members include lots of folks from state DNRs and so forth, as well as many, many, many federal employees. So I'll just start us off and then hand it to the folks who know what they're talking about. We're going to be talking about how states are planning to welcome and accommodate growing river use, knowing that we saw both a continuation of increased use this year on many of our rivers, and it was all accelerated by response to the COVID pandemic and people being cooped up inside. So I am Risa Shimoda with the River Management Society. I'm executive director. And Angie, you might want to wave your hand. Angie Furman is the coordinator for our River Training Center. So anytime we're doing a training or a conversation like this, or a recording or posting or organizing, recruiting and working with instructors, it's Angie who's been doing a really great job this year. And then Lelia Mellon. Why don't you can just take it from here, Lily. I'll let you introduce yourself and then carry on.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Lelia Mellon, and I work for the outreach program of the National Park Service called the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. And we offer technical assistance to groups on outdoor recreation and conservation and river stuff. So I am helping RMS try to get this state river group together, making it into a network of folks who have similar interests and needs, so that we can talk together and learn and then move forward. So thus this schedule of webinars that we've been doing once a month. We've got a whole lineup for the rest of 2020 and then well into 2021. So you can look in the digest, I think is the latest, has the listing of the topics. Reach out to us and suggest other things that you might want to talk about or learn, or get support from each other. So with that, we have our 3 speakers today, and they're going to talk about, as what Risa said, their years, their 2020s, which we're all going to be happy to put in the books. So we're going to start with John, then go to Dave, and then Leslie, as you hopefully see on your screen. And then have questions. Are we doing questions at the end of each person or at the end of all 3? That was
end of all 3.
Okay, so keep your questions, and we're gonna make sure we leave time for those at the end. Okay, so John.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John White. I'm the Chief of Operations for Visitor and Resource Protection with the Niobrara National Scenic River. We're a unit of the National Park Service located in north central Nebraska, and we are part of the Wild and Scenic River System. We have a boundary, but we have no land. So our authority is basically between the shorelines to the mean high water mark, and we have control over what happens on the waterway. Through our river, there's 3 public landings. One of them is run by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, one of them by Nebraska Game and Parks, and the third by the Middle Niobrara Natural Resources District. And the outfitters own the rest. None of the outfitters are currently putting any of their staff on the water, so we do not run a permit system. All the business that they conduct is on private land. And so we have no authority over them. We're proprietary jurisdiction. So we may be a little bit different than most of you as far as how we can operate. Getting to the first question, and the slide you see here, this is a typical Monday through Thursday day on the river, this first slide. And this is kind of what we were hoping to see for the summer with people cooperating, but it didn't quite turn out that way. So the first question, I'm going to go to the next slide. What surprised us or occurred differently than anticipated? We didn't really know what to anticipate. We had talked over with a couple of our cooperating land managers, and they actually thought we were going to see a drop in visitation. And just the region we live in, it's fairly minimal government, and these folks did not want to add any new signing or regulations to their landings, and they felt the visitors were savvy enough to be able to take care of themselves and self-regulate. The closest we got to anything being posted would be the Nebraska Game and Parks, and they took the stance that things would stay open, and as long as people behave themselves, they weren't going to do anything. If it got to a point where people were behaving themselves, and they would just close the area down rather than put up any signing. So it was either going to be all the way open or all the way closed. As far as our outfitters, they didn't really know what to do or what they wanted to do, and they were waiting for further guidance to kind of see how things would play out. Some of them considered just business as usual. Others considered not opening at all, and some ended up taking really great precautions and wiping down all their gear and keeping groups separated in the vans and trying to shuttle just vehicle drivers instead of whole groups, and really took it seriously. And on the other end, there were some outfitters that really didn't change the way they did anything. And we have about a dozen outfitters or so, and that covered the whole spectrum from one end to the other. Folks doing really everything they could, and folks doing not much at all, and everything in between. We did end up with a record year for visitation, and the best guess we have is because we are rurally located, and we really had no COVID cases in our area until after the season was over. I don't know that we recorded any. In the Valentine community, I think we had 2, and they had been infected in South Dakota. Other than that, the activity on the river really had no COVID cases at all. The next question, what did we try early and evolve to? Oh, and this slide here, this is a typical weekend user group for us. A lot more tubing on the weekend, a lot more canoes and kayaks on the weekdays. But again, I think all these people probably know each other, but none of them really taking precautions amongst themselves. Things we tried with just communicating with the land managers and the outfitters. We started that in late April, and we discussed options related to closing the river landings, how to deal with congestion, sterilization of gear and vehicles, shuttling drivers instead of groups, using screening forms, applying restrictions, but everything we presented was just a suggestion. Again, we had no authority over these folks, and really wanted to tread lightly and not try to over-influence them. But it was a successful call. We had some good participation and discussion, and gave them things to think about, but again, the decisions were theirs. We also tuned into what the State Tourism Office was predicting beginning in March. And they seem to know exactly what they're talking about as far as where people were going to go recreate. We did a lot of collaboration with the county tourism and Chamber of Commerce groups, local radio and newspaper, and again, the outfitters. And we tried to keep our social media site up to date. And we ended up doing 3 public service announcements with our folks. The first one was just to let people know the river was open. We tried to encourage people to come on weekdays versus weekends. And excuse me, did some work with the joint work with the outfitters and the tourism board. Throughout the season, we conducted a couple of status check calls with our outfitters just to see how things were going, and get their feedback on what they were doing and how it was working for them. But again, not knowing if what we were doing was working or not, because COVID just really didn't get into our area until after the season was over. And we probably would have had the increased visitation even without the PSAs. One of the things we did back off on as an organization was our interpretive programs. We had planned on having a revolving tent that we could set up and take down to do our programs in, but we decided that was too much of a confined space for our staff. And so we decided not to do that. As far as our folks on the water, our rangers making contacts, we all had face masks and basically just kind of backed off on the contacts we were making. So things that we might have been up close and personal with folks last year on, we kind of talked to them from more of a distance this year. And again, no, we didn't get any staff sick, so I guess it worked. For 2021, is this the next question? We're going to probably just do the same things we did this year. We tried to take the best precautions we could. Again, we did not get any staff sick. So as far as we know, it worked well. One of the other things we did was break our group down. We have about 14 people here in the summer, and we broke down into groups of 2s and 3s, and those were our safety circles. And we tried to just interact with those people so that if one of us got sick, we'd only infect 1 or 2 other people instead of the whole staff. And that seemed to work. It was a little difficult shuttling vehicles, but we made it work okay. And then in next year, we'll probably do more digital programming instead of face-to-face stuff. And it's going to be up in the air to see what our outfitters do, because some of them, again, didn't take things super seriously, but COVID wasn't in the area. And now that it is in the area, and there are folks in Valentine getting sick, I wouldn't be surprised if there were a couple outfitters that didn't open next year, or at least took a lot more precaution. As far as our planning, staffing, equipment, anything changing, again, permit system changes, that's not really applicable to us. We did not see an increase in search and rescue. We did see an increase in people not knowing where to get in and out or respecting private property. There were folks that were getting out at landings and not realizing that they had to pay the landowner a fee to do that. There were some people just kind of walking cross country to access the river. I don't know if they thought it was all public land or what, but I think those are some common problems nationwide as well. And, we're just going to have to kind of wait and see. Like I said, we've got the PPE for our staff. It'll be interesting to see what the outfitters decide to do. We do hold an annual meeting with them every January, and we'll get together with them then and kind of talk about what they're thinking for the next season. And then I think our last slide here shows what our big, that's our state park landing on a Saturday, most likely. And it even gets more crowded than that again, but people not really taking individual precautions. But again, with our authority situation, we don't really have, well, I don't know anybody who's really enforcing face mask on anybody, but we're really limited on what we could do. So that is all I have.
Thanks, John. Thanks. And like Dave Cernicek mentioned, we'll keep questions to the end, but now we're going to move on to Dave Cernicek. Take it away, Dave.
All righty, I will do that. I kind of moved sort of fast, but learned a lot of lessons this last summer. I work on the Snake River primarily, the Snake River Canyon outside of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We do, generally close to 80 to 100,000 commercial customers, and usually about 40 to 50,000 people on the non-commercial side that do 2 to 3 trips in a day. Some just do 1, but our use is about 150 to 200,000 trips down 8 miles of primarily whitewater, class 3 whitewater. Plus we have an upper section that has a lot of fishing, that type of stuff. But we have some bigger ramps, bigger facilities, fast food boating at its best. Commercial boats are huge. They can hold up to 16 people. It's a big area. But going to just kind of zip through a lot of the lessons learned of going through the season, and hopefully there's something that's worthwhile to other folks to learn from. Let's go to the next slide, please. First and foremost is your agency's got to be willing to adapt a little bit for safety if success is your true goal. Think about what you can do to make it possible for outfitted customers, for public, for whatever. And your primary goal here is your personal safety, your ranger safety first and foremost, and everybody else. But if there's things out there that you can bend on, I had two of my bigger outfitters didn't operate last year. That left a lot of allocation open to move things around. It allowed me to allow my other operating outfitters to do things like split, a bigger group that would be really close together in one boat into two boats, without adding more boats to the general scene or violating our management plan. But really, the agency has to bend a little bit. You can't be as stiff and stodgy as usual. You have to be able to adapt a little bit to bring safety to your situation. I also have like a big giant parking lot near my put in that I was able to use to outfitters could have their customers bring cars to the river if they were uncomfortable coming in a bus, and that up to safety, and we were fine with doing that. Not something we do in a normal year, but pandemic years, a lot of things go. Next slide, please. One real tip is don't set the system up around one factor that can change all the time. A lot of people set up things around their governors or their health departments. We didn't do that. We set things up around distancing. What can we do for our best distancing? This was mainly with our outfitted uses, stuff like that. How many people can really fit into a boat and stay spaced? How many people can we put on a bus? People were allowed in buses in groups as families, or if they came to the river to the outfitter as a group, that's fine. They could stay as a group, but we set things up around our ramps capacity, our buses capacity, all that type of stuff. We didn't have things that just could go up if the governor changed his mind or things like that. So our system didn't blow up all the time. We had no more than 10 commercial customers in a boat at a time. We had no more than 2 companies on the ramp at a time. And most of these things most of these regulations were the product of the outfitters working together and coming up with reasonable working regulations for them to operate under, and the Forest Service just made that the rules. But that didn't vary if the CDC said something new or the governor said something new, and so that brought a lot of success to our program. Next slide, please. One really big thing is set up your playing field to your advantage. This is a picture of just some drying racks. We had a hot seat unit that we set up for people, mainly outfitters, to wash their gear between trips so they could get fluids off from previous customers to the next customers for life jackets and dry and wetsuits. But having things like where to send customers or where to send groups when your rangers are unloading them at ramps, we put in posts, we put in colored posts, and we put in numbered posts depending on situations or whatever. But you can't send somebody somewhere unless you have somewhere to send them to. So instead of having people just end up in a big glob at the bottom of your ramp, we put in posts like post 1, post 2, post 3, post 4, and they were all measured out going downstream and upstream from our ramp. So the people unloaded, it's like, Griswold's, please take your party down to post 1. Johnson's, take your party down to post 2. All your boats and all your people need to be down there. We'd like you people to do your shuttles before you do your trip today, because our takeout is much smaller. We don't have room to hold all those people like our put-in does. So we want your shuttles to happen first. And, you can game your system before people come to the river. And that's where it's going to be a lot better to do this stuff. Stack the deck in your favor as the managing agency, not have this free for all. There's so many different things you can do. I don't have time to try cover them all today, but that's up to you to do that in your favor. And there's a lot of things possible. Next slide, please. Message is everything in this stuff. We had a lot of battles on the ramps of people who wanted to have a fist fight over whether COVID exists or is a fraud or whatever, that type of stuff. We don't play that. Our message with folks last year was just, will you help us keep the river open? The Forest Service, the governor, whoever was the son of a bitch who was keeping our ramps closed, or the possibility, and we were under pressure to run a good show down there, but it wasn't about help us, COVID's here, we're scared of it, that type of thing. But it's like, hey buddy, could you help us do a few things that we got to keep going on to keep our ramps open and stay in line with what the state's asked us to do. And people were more pliable to that, instead of arguing, you have to wear a mask because, or anything else like that. We were out there for the people, we didn't fight with the people who didn't believe in COVID or anything like that, but we did a really good job of trying to keep, the families away from the non-maskers that, didn't want to get COVID, and that's who we were kind of working for. So message is everything. Don't debate COVID. Just ask people to work with you to keep your river open. Next slide, please. Getting on to our employee stuff, we did have some scares on the crew last year, things to need to know about. Have a plan, know your plan, and always follow your plan. If your agency's like mine, you have a big place on the server where they showed you it's intimidating as heck, and it has, 50,000 gigabytes of COVID type of planning. You don't need to know all that. Have your people know exactly what they need to know, and that's just that. What happens when somebody's infected, or what to do when you have symptoms, that type of things. That's all your people need to know. If you don't have a plan, you need to get a plan, but just keep your people to knowing the basic plans that they need to know for today and tomorrow, and being a river program, not what happens if a backhoe turns over 3 districts over. Next slide, please. 2, it's critical to make sure that all employees are comfortable and clear that calling in with symptoms and not coming to work is the correct and most noble thing they can ever do in their life for the good of the order. It is, having somebody come in who's sick is going to kill off your program, and it can kill it off for a long time. Make sure every employee is clear that you're interested in keeping them working. These are our employees who have no money in the bank. They usually don't have sick leave. They don't have anything like that. They have to know that you will keep them working. You will not let them starve to death. And we all are depending on everybody on the crew to call in if they have symptoms. And that is the cool thing to do. And you will have something for them to do in those weeks that they're doing it. Because that's a big difference. If people feel like they're going to go broke and die lonely in the streets after killing off the river crew, if they have symptoms, that's what they will do. Do not allow that to happen. Make sure everybody knows that the thing to do is to call in. It came down to it on my crew, and thank God the kid called in. But make sure that is the thing that you stress all the time, that you must call in and we will take care of you. It is not the end of the world, and that's the best thing you can do, and we'll love you forever for doing that. Next slide, please. Along with that, all crews are only as strong as the nightlife choices of the crew's weakest link. I had a couple 19-year-olds who drove me nuts all summer long. It's not what your crew's doing while they're on duty as much as what they're doing off duty. And if they're playing kissy face or passing a pipe or passing around a bottle of whiskey with the dudes, that's the stuff that brings stuff home to your crew, and it's scary. Consider if you're an employer, if you're the supervisor or whatever, you can get a lot better sleep, and it's worth every dime to buy some cheap beer and burgers and a basket and a volleyball net or whatever, to keep your folks close. Because if you have people that are wandering around doing whatever at night, that's the danger to your crew, is the ones that are doing stupid things, and watching those folks is the critical piece. Next slide, please. You won't regret managing with a COVID-19 tracking mindset, and that's what I'm talking there, is keeping the same rangers together on a crew. It's usually we don't care who goes out with who or who's patrolling with who, but same people in a truck, same people in a patrol boat, that type of stuff makes it a lot easier when your big scare does come and it's real. Being able to have less than a handful of people that person's been near or on a shuttle with or anything like that makes all the difference in the world in trying to figure out if it's your whole crew that's going down or just a segment of your crew. Next slide, please. One big thing I figured out early in the summer was, having a touchy-feely part of a meeting, and this is delicate because you can't really talk to people about their backgrounds, but if you can kind of sneak it in there, getting people to talk about, is there anybody in your household that you're worried about getting COVID? And going around the room, if you talk about, at least for yourself, is like, yeah, I have somebody in my household who's immunocompromised, blah, 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 they have this and that or whatever. But when you when you go around the room, if people are willing to do that, that's where it's like, yeah, I have a brother who has cancer, and if he gets sick, then it's really, really bad. And when it becomes other people on the crew and other people are aware of that, it really ups the seriousness and reality of COVID. And it's spread. There were your dorky 19-year-olds suddenly aren't as acting as stupid and playing on their phones as much, and suddenly they're starting to get real serious about, oh, this is real. So and so is the only person who can buy groceries for their grandparents, and maybe I do need to behave myself a little bit better. Really powerful thing. Next slide, please. But that said, some employees just won't get it, and the thing is not to openly hate them. Keep it positive. Keep a relationship with them. Keep them knowing that if they take those masks off, they will be sent home. All the same things, but keep your relationship with them good, because they need, you need to be able to hear from them during the lunch break where they were at last night, or what they were doing, or how many people were there, or whatever. Keep those communication lines open. Do not hate those people openly, or else you will pay dearly for it if they hate you. Common sense. Next slide, please. Inspect all your equipment frequently. Look around at stuff. If anything's dirty, red tag it, lock it up. Do not clean up after your employees. One of our big scares on the crew this year, where we did have an employee go on the probable list for COVID. We did have a truck. He left his truck with a mask sitting on the seat and nothing cleaned up. And yeah, one of his coworkers was a nice guy and thought he'd clean it up for him. And that was, 8 hours before he called in going, hey, I have symptoms. Just red tag that stuff. Do not let anybody clean up after anybody. If the crew has to go without a special piece of equipment for a weekend, they'll let that person know and take it out on him or her. But do not get into letting people clean up after each other, go without equipment rather than doing that type of stuff. The person who cleaned up after the guy who we thought had COVID, it was a whole different world for him. He felt pretty disgusted and anxious after he found out what his situation was, when he thought he was just being a nice guy. That said, don't leave your masks and stuff around. Next slide, please. Talking about it before, have a list of quarantine duties that can be accomplished by any and all positions on your crew and intellects that with or without a computer before something comes up, because you can't come up with work for people that have COVID or are quarantining once you're in the crazy world of reporting all this stuff and getting people to tests and explaining things to superiors. But if you have job duties that can be done, you can keep people working 1 or 2 or 3, but it's stuff that you do right now, not during the summer. So get those things put together and you can actually keep people working and they will not die or starve to death or whatever. But this is the time to do that stuff, is come up with those boring databases that you always wanted or whatever it is. So work on that now and make sure that you do it for the people who don't have computer authorities in your given agency. Next slide, please. If something does come up, have one person assigned to the isolated or quarantine person, and that's kind of their go-to person who calls in, checks with them, takes care of them, make sure they get groceries. You can have them do that on the clock, that type of thing. But one that takes them off of your top of your list of priorities for things to do, because you have enough other stuff when that stuff comes up. And you also tell the rest of the crew just to stay in contact with them and leave them alone. That also helps with keeping the rumor mill down and keeping the employees you don't want to have contact and spinning things around and making other crews nervous that it's been spread to them. That type of stuff won't occur. And so if you can, just assign one person, the person who friends on the crew that are friends of the person who's quarantined or isolated will get in touch. That's not a big deal, but the ones who aren't supposed to won't. And so it saves a lot of trouble. Trust me on that one. Slide, please. Be able to explain the why of all of your decision making. And there is a lot of why asking of why you're not, calling back the fire crew from California because somebody on your river crew has something and they live in the same bunkhouse. All those types of things you need to be able to explain the why of, and that's not too hard to do. Next slide, please. There is, in your agency, there's help. Ask for it. You need it when this stuff does come up. And, finally, next slide, please. Be aware there's special needs employees that got to have more explanation than everybody else. But when this stuff does come up, it's like, yeah, why aren't we quarantining the entire river crew? Why aren't we doing the wilderness and the fire and the hydrology crew as well? Because some of them live in the same bunkhouse the person was in 3 days ago or whatever. You need to have answers to that, but you also need to be able to explain what an exposure is. It's 15 minutes with that person within 6 feet without a mask. Have you been with that person in the warehouse? No. Have you been with that person in a truck? No. Have you done it in the kiosk? No. Well, that's why you're not being quarantined. But being able to answer questions, being able to get people sat down and talking about this stuff is really important. But those are my basics of things to talk about with you guys today. And thank you for listening.
That was awesome, Dave. Thank you. So now we're going to stay west and go over to Canyonlands with Green and the Colorado Rivers with Leslie.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Excited to see you all today. I think we're one slide over. And I work in, thank you, Canyonlands National Park, where the Green and the Colorado River meet at the confluence in the heart of the park. And the Green River typically involves our private flatwater users, often canoe, kayaks. Our Colorado River is leading into Cataract Canyon, so most folks are launching on the Colorado to go through the Whitewater Rapids. My position is managing the commercial operators who are running outfits in the park, and we have about 17 contracts that run through the Whitewater section and about 2 that are on the Flatwater. I'm a little new to this position, but I started in May during the height of the pandemic, and so we learned a lot, kind of had to pick up and start running with everything that was going on. If you could hit the next slide. The timeline for us was a little bit different because Canyonlands National Park did face a hard closure, and the local health department looked at hospital beds, influx of tourists, a lot of different factors, and essentially made a recommendation to the Moab community to try to put a temporary suspension on operations. So, oh, sorry, that's my landline. I can't actually turn it off, unfortunately. But the park faced a hard closure end of March through end of May, and we were completely closed. That included all backcountry operations and all river operations. What's tricky is that the launch ramp and the takeout ramp are both outside of Canyonlands. So most of our users are launching on the Potash boat ramp on BLM or on the Mineral Bottom boat ramp on BLM, and then taking out in Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. So I put some dates on there. I saw Todd Murdoch join, so these dates aren't exactly specific. They're kind of an estimate because BLM did have some suspension of permits in different locations, but the Moab Daily doesn't require a permit and was sort of open to locals throughout this process. Glen Canyon didn't quite have a hard closure and had areas open to day use as well, but some of their concessionaires closed. They closed some campgrounds, they closed some boat ramps. So it was a little bit tricky because while Canyonlands did have that hard closure, the put in and take out locations weren't quite on the exact same timeline. And so it did involve a lot of coordination and communication. In addition to that, working for the National Park Service, there were a couple other parks that got together, Grand Canyon, Dinosaur, and Big Bend, to really try to consolidate our resumption of operations and to do it in a more deliberate and organized way. Many of the outfitters that operate commercially between our parks are similar, and so we tried our best to streamline this process through all of the chaos. If you could hit the next slide. Essentially, this photo, it's actually from a land-based trip, but it kind of shows you some different COVID precautions that some of our outfitters were taking. And essentially, while the park was closed, we asked outfitters to submit a COVID-19 risk mitigation plan. And along with the health officers for the National Park Service, we kind of drafted an official set of guidelines of taking COVID precautions on backcountry and overnight trips. And so all of our outfitters, while we were closed, spent some considerable time trying to mitigate the risk and plan accordingly. For our private users, we sent out this backcountry recommendation COVID precaution list to anyone who had overnight permits or even day use permits in the park, and tried to initiate conversations and compliance in that way. And essentially throughout especially in the beginning of the season, we really tried to observe what was going on, tried to initiate conversations, and work with the private and commercial users. If you could hit the next slide. Overall, the patterns that we saw was a huge decrease in commercial use and a huge increase in private use. And we're not sure if that's because visitors were choosing to lead their own trips instead of going with an outfitter because of COVID and those risks. But despite being closed for over 2 months, we are at extremely high levels, and every single day in all districts of the park, we seem to continue to break records for having a busier day, or this specific day at this time is the busiest we've ever had. So we're breaking records left and right with private use, but we did see a pretty big decrease in commercial use, and actually 3 of our commercial operators did not operate in 2020 because of COVID concerns and needed to focus their efforts on some primary aspects of their operation. What we saw with COVID compliance in the park was absolutely across the board. Again, we had some operators who chose not to operate at all. We had some that were following their risk mitigation plans very, very strictly. It was something that was clearly defined before visitors joined the trip and all throughout the trip. We had some outfitters that, absolutely tried their best, but there wasn't as much compliance or precautions taken. And we're not sure if that's perhaps because it is a guiding industry. You're based on customer service. You want to make your clients and the visitors on your trip happy. And so sometimes it can be really tricky when you have such a different spectrum of thoughts and ideas about COVID and what's appropriate. I guess at the far end of the spectrum would be our private users. Our private users took almost no precautions. We didn't really see very many precautions being taken from these groups, Flatwater or Whitewater, perhaps because they were in family units or smaller groups. But again, our group size on the river is up to 40 people. So we didn't see as many precautions taken from those private users. We just basically, as this season wore on, just tried to work closely with our NPS health officials and our county health department to make decisions and adapt as conditions came or as potential positive cases arose among the community. If you could hit the next slide. Overall, some of the things that we learned looking back on the season is I think our outfitters did a great job of creating these risk mitigation plans, but we have heard a lot more research from COVID about contact surfaces not being as big of a concern as proximity and those actual droplets coming from another person. And so, thinking about focusing a little bit more on that social distancing, on the masks, and more of those close proximity situations. We found that when COVID precautions were up to guests, they weren't necessarily as followed as stringently as I kind of discussed on the last slide. And so we are going to have the outfitters resubmit their COVID plans with some of the updated research and science about COVID, but then again, just about what they learned, what worked best, what were some of the practices that they could follow that consistently seemed to be effective throughout the season. Compliance is not really enforceable, as I'm sure all of the federal agencies can recognize. We weren't really able to enforce this. I couldn't evaluate concessioners on their COVID plans, but we could at least have discussions. So the River Rangers did an excellent job whenever possible to initiate conversations, to talk with these different groups, to read the plans and say, hey, I saw you mention this. Was there an issue for why you weren't able to do it? Has it been difficult? Were you able to develop new methods? Any of the busier days, Rangers went down to the BLM boat ramps and tried to, as much as they could, spread out some of the launches, talk to people, have people kind of stay in their separate groups. Again, we can't really enforce anything, but we tried our best to really at least make it about conversation and education. For 2021, we just continue to respond to state and local guidance accordingly. We get sometimes pretty tricky and conflicting guidance based on state and local regulations, and sometimes even federal regulations. So this year, we really weren't able to limit group sizes, set any launch limits, and that may be something that could be possible in 2021, but at this point, we're just trying to adapt on what we were able to do this year and apply that to 2021. We are expecting a lot more use, especially a lot more private use in 2021 as well. This fall, we had low water, so if we have a little bit higher water next fall, we'll probably see an increase of use. And then last spring, we were closed for 2 whole months, actually over 2 months. And so if we're open again, we're probably going to continue to see a higher and busier season. So that's something that we're kind of keeping our eye out for as well. And then if you could hit that last slide. Essentially, it was a roller coaster. When we first started with a hard closure, we were very nervous and worried about what would happen to a really small community with so many tourists. And then we set standards for taking precautions. We dealt with some potential cases, nothing specifically related to the river in the park, but guides at companies in the community. But as the course of the summer went on, I think we and a lot of our outfitters and private users really became compliant, and some did really, really well at following the precautions, and some became a little bit more complacent than compliant. And so we're hoping to take what we learned this year, really apply it, really jumpstart 2021 so that we can keep our rivers safe and continue to keep the waters open, kind of as Dave said as well. And so I think that's my last slide, and the final one is just a question slide. And I believe Risa was asking us to kind of conclude our portion of it and then open it up to the group for questions, dialogue, or just to have a conversation instead of presentation format.
Right. Well, thank you, Leslie and John and Dave, for your stories, which show that what Dave manages. Dave works for the Forest Service and manages the launches where he works, and the other 2 of you guys don't own the land where people are getting in and out of. And I hadn't really thought about that. So the need for managing is as much working with partners and kind of informally influencing folks and their behavior, which is kind of tough to do, particularly when you can't control things. Are there questions or other stories? I think that we would be okay and not crazy if you just had questions or comments and just unmute yourself. I think so. Anything that sounds like exactly like what happened with you or your river, or something that you have a question about from one of the presenters? I see lots of people who are responsible for launches. Lots of people who have lots and lots of customers or folks like Mike Dussert. You probably will take the cake for a number of people that you see in the course of a year down on New Braunfels.
Yeah, maybe so. I noticed the picture that was sent out in announcing this little get together was of the Comal River, which is not in my jurisdiction, but right next door. And it's a little crazy. I guess I'll just echo that we also saw a massive increase in private use, in non-commercial use. We
Could you just share where you are again, please?
Canyon Lake, Texas, the Guadalupe River, and right next to us is the Comal River. And between the 2 of them, and they're probably the tubing mecca of the country. About Memorial Day weekend until about late June, all businesses were going just crazy busy. People were dying out and about and on the water. The governor specifically shut down all river operations businesses at about June 25th, and that lasted through about November, when he let up until groups of 10 or less. But of course, the tubing season is well over. Of course, as I say that, it's 77 degrees and sunny outside, but So what happened when the governor shut down all tubing is that people came out of the woodwork with their own tubes that they bought at Walmart or wherever they picked them up and paid people to park anywhere they could along the river. And then were shuttling themselves in pickup trucks and cars and whatever. The problem that we had with that is that there are still these masses of people on the river, but now there's no education and control point for them. And so rather than being educated and distanced by outfitters, they're out there interacting, drinking, doing everything they do with no means of control whatsoever. So it was a nightmare out here. And we absolutely saw hordes, and we're expecting 2021 to bring more of the same.
When you say 2021 would be similar, is that because because of COVID still being here and not being able to bowl and watch movies, or because people have discovered this cool new place and they're going to go back to this place they discovered? Maybe both. No.
Did I freeze?
Oh, Mike, your connection isn't great. Give it. Sometimes that helps if you take your video off. Maybe not.
Yep,
There
I'm
you go.
working on it.
Yeah, now we can hear you better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. Teresa, I didn't actually catch anything of what you said. My whole system.
Oh no, I was just saying when you said you were expecting big numbers next year again, I asked if you thought that was partly, I sort of answered my own question, but partly because people will still be not able to attend Little League games or go to the movies and their normal activities, or if they've discovered the river and are just going to come back because they've discovered this new place to go. Maybe we've lost him.
Hey, Risa, this is T-Berry in Canyonlands National Park.
Hey.
Hey, so one of the things that we saw, and Leslie was talking about our exploded use of private use. One of the things that we think we saw this year was the fact that a lot of people canceled permits on rivers that have a higher demand than permits. Realized on us that we still have no launch limits, and really our river management plan's kind of archaic with the Pleistocene dinosaurs. And I think that's what caused a huge surge that we saw this year. But then on the flip side of that, this whole area exploded in tourism because I think people couldn't do anything, and they realized the great outdoors were this amazing place to go that they could actually, quarantine in their own family units. So they bought bicycles. I mean, you can't buy a bicycle in this country or bicycle parts. You can't really buy river equipment. The local welder that builds raft frames is booked for 6 months. So people have all of a sudden exploded into the outdoors, and then wherever they can find use and get onto a river seems to be where they are going to pile up.
That makes sense. Thanks, T-Berry. So I'm curious if folks are, since we don't really know exactly how cabin fever like people will be come this spring and summer, if you're planning for the worst or planning like Mike was saying for equal to 2020, where you're sort of waiting. I don't know if it means that you relative to hiring, staffing or equipment, or like John and Dave and Leslie, are you planning for the worst and hoping that it will be not the worst?
Well, I think we're planning for the same or more. If we had to decide, but we don't have the flexibility of just saying, "Oh yeah, I think it's going to be worse. Let's hire a couple more people." Our budget is set, and we're going to get what we get and have to deal with it the best we can.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely leaves us with a lot of decisions to make. I think we'll go into 2021 with this is the same setup as we had for we kept through 2020. We did some stuff like we did put a moratorium on our large group permitting program and temporary outfitters, universities, extra permits, extra stuff that brought more groups and more people to our river. And that's something that we have to review in the very near future of, are we going to again not ask for more people coming, because turning down something doesn't mean you're turning it off completely. It just means it can come in a different form. But there's this time we have more ability to plan for it than we did last year, and I think we are forever changed. I think those levels aren't necessarily going to go down. I think it will go down somewhat if we have a vaccine, and other countries are kind enough to let us back into them. But I am going to plan as if we're going to continue 2020.
Mm-hmm. Leslie, how about you?
I think it's hard to say. I don't think our use levels are going to decrease. I foresee them continuing to go up, because even at the heart of the pandemic, I guess we thought people weren't going to be traveling across states, and they were exponential numbers. And so I can't imagine it's going to impact us by decreasing visitors. But again, similar to what John was saying, we have a standard budget, and we, have even less money this year from being closed, from commercial operators operating, and so we might even have less staff available. I think T-Berry might, he said we're down 2 positions in the river. So I think the increase is going to continue. I think we're probably going to be down a little bit in staff. However, for almost the entire season, even for our land-based folks, we had an order of 50 people or less, but you could even exceed that if you wanted to in the state of Utah. We have a little bit different tone now because of such horrendous case amounts and what's been going on in the community. So we might have something that's changed in 2021, but I'm not really sure if any of the limitations or uses will change.
I'd like to ask a question, thanks Leslie, about safety and rescue. If where I live near the Potomac River, there was a marked increase in rescues, and worry about the crowds in the context of there being more people who didn't know what they were doing, didn't know swimming, how to swim, couldn't read the signs or whatever, so they had to ramp up or send more people out more often, and sometimes it was recovery instead of a rescue. Was there did other people have that? Because so the locals are wondering, okay, not so much budget, but staffing. Should we plan to be rescuing people as often, and what can we do to lower that? Any comments about that?
I think we were very lucky this year to get through high water without our typical number of calls that we usually have when the water's high. So we got off very lucky there. We did have calls on the river and trails, mountains, downhill biking, that type of stuff that were kind of on the normal end. What we are seeing more is a lot of people going out by themselves in the rescue world. Of folks aren't going out in big groups as much, and they're a lot more likely to get in trouble by themselves. Is what I've noticed. Not noticing a marked huge increase in stuff, but I'm noticing that we're finding people later that couldn't get help for themselves, or somebody else is finding them at a kind of a more advanced stage of their injuries or whatever, or maybe after their golden hour is passed. Is one thing that's noticeable, but not a huge call volume. But what is, I live in a community right now where our hospital is filled, between normal call and COVID beds filled. We have no capacity, so that should that have any bearing on what we're decisions making in river world or recreation world of what are we allowing? Are we attracting more? Are we attracting more demand for our hospital services? We don't have those services currently.
Oh, thanks. Another story I've heard, and more on more urban or populous rivers where people are doing things like tubing. And when people who are unfamiliar with a location, we were on a meeting on the lower Delaware where people who are unfamiliar just don't know where they're going. Someone mentioned that earlier, maybe John. So without signage, they didn't know where to get out, and they were in their own tube that they bought. So they had to call a rescue squad at 10 o'clock at night because they were just lost. Or they were on somebody's front lawn wandering around.
Hey, Risa, in Canyonlands, we had about the normal call volume that we had in the last couple of years. And then we also put together a questionnaire. So whenever we approach somebody in Arches, for instance, for a call that might involve a litter carrier, there's a question system that lets us know whether or not how much we're going to suit up and how much PPE we're going to put on. As well as we also came up with our own transport protocols, and some of them are kind of rough, that if you're in a backcountry four-wheel drive situation, there may be the possibility that you have to ride in the back of the pickup truck because we don't want to risk our rangers getting COVID. We also figured out which helicopters would fly COVID patients versus not. And luckily, we did not have to do any boat-based transports, but we even had a full PPE kit ready to be Tyvek'd up and haul somebody out in 120-degree heat.
Wow. That's planning that no one had to do before. You didn't have to do last year. Any other questions? Or
Risa,
thoughts? Yeah.
Risa, this is Shane Wolf. I work with Mike. I'm with Rockingham River Rise down here in Texas. I'm on both the Guadalupe and Comal. And unfortunately, I'm kind of glad to hear the common denominator that we're all talking about. It's the issues of the private equipment and the uneducated. And I'm wondering, maybe too much 10,000-foot view of thinking, but is there a national message here that we all need to join forces and get together on the safety aspect of it? The no swim, the no go, the pack it in, pack it out, know the local laws, the ingress, egress points. End of the day, check with your state agency or local outfitter. I mean, something that, because we're all running literally, from all over the country that I just heard. And I'm blown away that I heard that, because I kind of live in my own bubble down here and thinking that it was just us after the governor closed us down from that perspective. But I don't know the economics of the Rivers Association or the river management side of it, but there may be a bigger picture here that we can all address.
I've heard everything that you've just said, Shane. You just said it all right there. And it's outreach and communication. And I don't know how many languages we have to communicate in, maybe just a couple. But if it's the issue, many of the issues were with people who are not aware, and you can't blame them for not being aware, but you also don't want to be hauling them off the river. So it's about communication and how to do it and how to coordinate state, local, federal jurisdictions. That's a big question, but I think that's what's important.
We tried a little bit with our recreate local message, but in the middle of the summer we did kind of an informal count one weekend of the license plates around town, and we had 27 different states represented in north central Nebraska. It's like, you got to come a long way to be one of those 27 states to get to Nebraska. So the recreated home message just wasn't being received or followed, even though I know it was out there. I know it was tried, but just seemed to be ignored in our area.
Right. And I saw Korea just put recreate responsibly. There was an effort like REI and some organizations tried to get that message out. But if you're speaking to someone who normally bowls on Saturday afternoons, how do you find them to get that message to them? The person who went on a tubing outfitter trip and really liked it a lot, so bought their own tube, how do you define that audience? That's, they all go to Dick's Sporting Goods, and Dick's Sporting Goods isn't going to do it. So maybe we need that. It's, the people floating on penguins and, you know, swans, you know, those type of floaters. And you don't want to further characterize them because suddenly you're criticizing people for wanting to be out on a hot day on the water. And that's not fair either. So I think, Shane, that's the balancing act. Who does that? It's like everybody has to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and agree on some program, I think.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and we've got tons of education points both with our local city as well as with Mike, who has the Water Winter Recreation District from that point. And I mean, I'm even thinking an episode with Good Morning America and CBS and Sunday News, because this is so big. One life matters, just like we're knowing with COVID. And we've all, unfortunately, had a drowning either this last year or years before. And it is a lot of those that are uneducated. And I know we're doing the same thing. We're pushing it out everywhere we can with those coming in from the gas stations and the hoteliers. But this is a great group here. I appreciate the email and the invite and learned a lot and a lot of the same stuff that we're all facing. It's good information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. Any other comments? Susan, I saw you turn your video on. You hadn't been able to see the slides we see. We'll get your recording.
Oh, what I was going to say is one of the things we started doing is when we started seeing so many private people and not knowing the right places to get off, the right launches to use, that kind of thing. And we started having people getting into rapids and they didn't know what to do. And we had private people pulling people out of rapids. We were trying to figure out what can we do to help mitigate this, because how do we find them? We finally we created a rapids list and made a flyer out of it and took it to all our hotels, because we started thinking they're staying somewhere. Some of them are camping, so we may not be able to get to them, but the hotels were full the whole summer. So we were trying to reach them at the hotels. At least we could get information in their hands before they went out. So that was, we started it late. So I'm hopefully we will be on track this year to start it early so we can mitigate some of the things we saw early on.
And Susan, where are you?
Niobrara National Scenic River. I work with John.
Got it. Great.
And also I have Nora O'Donnell's cell phone if you guys want to contact her about a story. She's on CBS.
Ooh, we might ask you for that. I think that you have to, we almost need to have Nora take a trip. It's,
Yeah.
you know, really, it's difficult to express what it's like and what it's like to miss your takeout, you know, or
Actually,
what it's like to see.
CBS has one of the reporters that roams around. He was talking about, well, it was during the centennial that he had hit every national park, and I knew he hadn't because there are 414, and he said he went to 58. So I got annoyed after I saw it, and I just hunted him down on the internet, and I emailed him and invited him to my national park because he hadn't listed it. And he actually responded, and so I do have his, but he's the guy who goes all over the country investigating things. So he would actually be better because that's what he does.
Mm-hmm. And calling him on not being correct with his statistics is a really good way to get him to visit.
Yeah, I invited him to come visit. So, and he basically sent me a very nice message that, yes, I know there are more national parks in the 58, but there was no way for me to hit them all in a year. And I said I would do it in a year. So I said, well, the offer is still open to come visit.
Okay, that's awesome. I did see some notes from Susie. She is on the upper Delaware, who said they had a lot of drownings. So that's, yeah.
Wow, 7?
Yeah. Yeah, the drownings that we had on the Potomac were people who were picnicking and walking or wading and not being swimmers. So we're a little bit past time. I guess we should close out. Any last minute burning questions, put them in the chat box. We'll try to respond, and we'll have Angie will help me if I can't remember how to do this well, post the recording. It will be, you want to show the slide and maybe where the recording will take place? I mean,
Angie's doing that. So next month's call is going to be on January 12th, same time, same place, same channel. And it's going to be about, the topic is river access for non-traditional river users. So it actually gets to some of what we've just been talking about.
Does.
Handle these new people who we want to encourage, but we want them to be safe. And then looking ahead, February 9th, it's going to be use conflicts and capacity, practices, regulations, and trade-offs.
And to access the recording, if you just go to the RMS page and go to the River Training Center, as you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see our video channel here. And on our video channel, you will have access to all of the conversations that we have. You can see the one that we did last month here on the left, and down here in the river management conversations, we'll be posting this video as well.
Yeah, we had the more kind of formal training type presentations, and these are just conversations. So if there are not other things, thank you a million for joining us today. And thank you, Dave and John and Leslie, for preparing, telling us about what's been going on, and Angie for being here, and Becca Price, you want to wave your hand too. Becca's our communication coordinator. So thanks you guys for being here, and maybe we'll see you next month. Thanks for being members, if you are, of the River Management Society, and keep washing your hands. We're not over. We're not done with this yet. So take care. Happy holidays, everyone.
Yep.
Thanks,
Welcome.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.